Imagine you have a Looker dashboard filled with visualizations and useful insights. Your stakeholders want to see this dashboard, but they are accustomed to using other applications, not Looker. How can your dashboard reach them? Embed the dashboard into the application your stakeholders use so they can access their data easily without leaving their application or disrupting their workflows. Hi! Welcome to our video series on developing with Looker and Looker Studio. I'm Jeremy, a Senior Developer Relations Engineer at Looker. In this video, we'll introduce you to how you can develop with Looker embedding. We'll explore two key methods for embedding Looker into your host application: private embedding and signed embedding. We'll also discuss how your application can programmatically interact with embedded content and how the Embed SDK simplifies the embedding process. By the way, a quick knowledge check. We assume you have basic knowledge of JavaScript and the iframe HTML element. First, what is private embedding? Well, when your user lands on your application's web page, your application should create an iframe inside the web page's DOM. Then, you take a modified URL of your Looker content and set it on your iframe's source attribute. And done! Now you have embedded Looker content in your iframe inside your host application. Keep in mind, for this option, your user must log into Looker separately via your admin's chosen authentication mechanism. The user's Looker account also must have the right permissions to access the embedded content. You should consider private embedding if you need a quick and easy embedding option, and most importantly, your user can log in to your Looker instance. But what if your user doesn't have a Looker account, or you want your host application to control user authentication and authorization? For example, your user authenticates with your host application's identity provider, but that provider is not associated with your Looker instance. Then, you should check out the signed embedding option. Like private embedding, you create an iframe in your application's web page. This time, you point the iframe source attribute to a signed embed URL. A signed embed URL is unique and can only be used one time to load Looker content. This URL authenticates the user as an existing or new Looker embed user. The embed user's access permissions can be set by the URL or internally in the Looker instance. Keep in mind, your application must generate a new signed embed URL every time your user accesses the embedded Looker content. But how do you generate this URL? Let's look at a simplified example flow to generate a signed embed URL. Imagine at a high level, you have your host application's front end, back end, and your Looker instance. Whenever your user logs into your host application's backend authenticates and authorizes the user. The backend then fetches a signed embed URL from the Looker instance's embed/sso_URL endpoint. The application frontend then sets the iframe source attribute to the signed embed URL. Now, your user can access Looker content embedded inside your application's iframe. However, keep in mind, once your user loads the embedded content, your Looker instance immediately expires the signed embed URL. So you must generate a fresh URL for every new embed session. Now, let's go over how your host application can communicate with your iframe to make your embedded content more interactive. Your embedded Looker content and host application can communicate with each other with both private and signed embedding. Your iframe will emit events when its state changes, for example, when the embedded Looker dashboard finishes loading. Your host application can use the window.addEventListener method to listen to these events and react accordingly. Also, your host application can send messages to the iframe through the window.postMessage method. To change the embedded content state, for example, your application's web page could have a UI button that will rerun the embedded dashboard's queries. When the button is clicked, your host application sends a message to the iframe to rerun the queries. With all the technical possibilities we've discussed, you can use our Embed SDK to make it easier to embed Looker. With either private or signed embedding, the Embed SDK can manage the iframe for you. Instead of an explicit iframe in your application's DOM, the Embed SDK provides convenient JavaScript methods to create and manage the iframe. By the way, you can also use the Embed SDK to programmatically interact with your embedded Looker content. Instead of listening to iframe events with the window.addEventListener method, you can use the Embed SDK's onEvent method. And instead of using the window.postMessage method to send a message, you can use the Embed SDK's sendAction method, which is more convenient and readable. We hope this gave you a clear overview of how to start developing with Looker embedding. If you want to get started, we recommend a few options. Come watch our series of videos that dives deep into Looker embedding. Also, try out the full stack demo inside the Embed SDK's repository. And lastly, check out our Getting Started documentation. They're all linked in the description below. Look forward to more videos as we introduce you to other ways you can develop on Looker and Looker Studio. We'll see you in the next video.